Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Suttonville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic. This week we are tackling a subject that one of our listeners sent us a pretty good email about. It was long in its nature and had a lot of good content in it, but the gist of it was really 101 for flight training, right? They wanted to know if there was a checklist or a way that we could provide such checklist to make it easy to go from zero time to finishing their private pilot certificate. How many times have you had that conversation with people, Wally?
I wouldn't say thousands, but I'm sure hundreds.
Yeah, and being the owner of a flight school, I get to have that conversation quite a bit. So Eric W., if you're out there listening, this is your show. This is what you asked for. He gave us a challenge of creating or sharing our ideas around that checklist. And man, as I prepared, I found out it might be harder than I thought, but we're going to give it our best shot. And we had to even come up with a way to condense it all because there's so much information. And really that information comes from the fact that we all kind of get to this point differently. You know, I came to aviation with literally zero background until my neighbor, Gary, took time and went to a Starbucks and answered questions for me for a couple hours. I'm sure as your daughters decided to get into aviation, they had a very different perspective than me. Their dad was an airline pilot, had owned planes. They had probably been in a lot of planes. Their perspective of it all had to be very, very different. And I think everyone that comes to our flight school has a different mindset or a little bit of different background. And so we're going to try and condense this to people who want to be private pilots and that they're kind of coming with no knowledge. And hopefully that'll hit the gamut of our listeners out there and people that can share this with future listeners to kind of give them an idea of what it's like and that checklist to go from no time to being successful on their check ride. So we'll kick it off. Wally, I think that you got to have some goals, and everybody's goals are going to be different. They might want to be a pilot, but their goals are going to be different. They might want to fly for fun. They might want to be a crew member for their family, i.e. my dad's a pilot, and I'd like to be able to know how I could land the plane if something were bad to happen, or maybe read a checklist for them. Maybe I want to be a professional pilot. Maybe I'm not really sure. I did not come to United Flight Systems with the plan of owning United Flight Systems. I came to become kind of a family pilot, and boy, things have changed. And the reason I think Eric's struggling, and probably many other listeners that are in the mode of learning how to fly, is aviation's like a secret society, isn't it, Wally?
It is. It absolutely is. And there's so many acronyms in aviation, and I think as pilots we don't do a good job of making the lingo basic. I use the phrase dummying it down, and I don't mean that literally. But for instance, if someone comes, someone may go to a pilot and say, well, hey, I want to learn to fly. The first thing they might say is, well, you need to go find a CFI. Well, what's a CFI? So, we as pilots can do a better job by saying, well, one of the first things that you probably ought to do is look for a flight instructor. Okay, we can call it a flight instructor rather than a CFI. And, everybody in the world knows what a flight instructor is. A flight instructor is one who instructs flight. Okay, it's very simple. But CFI, what does that mean? So be careful who you talk to. I mean, you may talk to a 70-year-old Vietnam era fighter pilot, and their perspective is going to be, maybe they haven't been in an airplane in 40 years, but they are a pilot. and maybe a very successful pilot at one point. So, just you
Things have
be,
changed, though. No question.
Things have changed
since they were
things
flying.
have changed. Yeah. But there's almost too much of information out there. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, it is, and it's sad because every other thing out there that I can point to has kind of a pathway or a really well-known path to do it. If I want to be a doctor, kind of everyone knows you got to go to school for 8 years and where to start in school, and you got to go to med school, and you got to go to residency, and kind of everybody knows that. If you want to be a lawyer, you got to go to a bunch of school, and you got to pass a bar exam. I don't know why we all know those things, but we don't know the steps to become a professional pilot. So it is no doubtingly a secret society, and we hope to uncover some of that for you today. And then if we think of this, as you become a pilot, you'll learn how to make a flight plan. We're going to consider this a flight plan, and we're going to talk about where you depart from originally and each little checkpoint along the way to get you ultimately to your destination of earning that first certificate and becoming a private pilot. There are a million guides that we found preparing for this from all the professional brands. And what I found very interesting when I looked at them all, Wally, is they were more sales guides than they were that de facto checklist. And while we're going to be biased today, or I'm going to be biased as a flight school owner, I'm not going to try and sell you on anything. I'm not going to say you got to go buy this to be successful, or this is the only brand that I know. I'm going to give you the overall view of what you need, give you some options, tell you the pros and cons of some. But at the end of the day, we're not trying to sell you anything. We're not trying to get you to buy our wares or our pamphlet. So keep that in mind when you're reading other people's stuff, that it might be more of a sales brochure than a true guide. So again, we'll kick this off. And if you think about it, Wally, with all the information out there, we hear from and talk to more people that have had bad advice than they've had good advice. And I don't think that's just our opinion there. I think that's more a reality. And we've talked about it on plenty of shows. But the top 3 pieces of what I consider bad advice that people get really, really early on is take your written before you ever do any flight training. That makes no sense. Train with an independent flight instructor. And while I'm all about independent flight instructors providing a certain role in flight training, I don't think that's the best mechanism for a private student to go getting hooked up. Now, there's various reasons why that might work. You live in a remote spot, your dad owns his own plane, and he's a flight instructor. I can give some counterpoints to this, but if you live in a metropolitan area and you go to an airport and you find an independent guy who has their own plane, but they're also an airline pilot, that's going to be tough for your schedule to match up with that person's schedule. It might work. I'm not saying don't. It's absolutely wrong, but that's not the best place to start. And then people that I hear say I have to do my private training under Part 141, they're getting a bad set of goods on that one. I don't think that's the best thing for a private student. And you might want to use caution. That school might be trying to kind of landlock you a little bit at their school. What else bad information do you think young to-be pilots get, Wally?
Yeah, well, I when people talk to me about flight schools, where should I go? I give them many different flight schools that I'm familiar with.
What?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
And I say, go check them out. Go see what the vibe is there, because they're all different. They really are all different. And I think there is a lot of merit to learning at a flight school, because you learn a lot by just hanging out, just sitting in the lobby, sitting in the pilot lounge if they have one, just talking to other students, passing them in the hallway. Did you just fly 123 Bravo Charlie today? Yeah. I don't know. There may be some little quirk about that airplane that you can ask this other person about. I don't know. There's a camaraderie that you develop. at other flight schools. Oh, hey, so and so just took their check ride today and passed it. Well, how'd it go? Just a lot
What
of
did
that.
What did Wally make you do? What did Wally make you do?
Yeah,
today?
exactly, exactly. I work with one flight school, and I joked with them that I said I know as soon as I'm out the door, all the CFIs are going to be on you, asking what you did. And what was funny is I did my post-activity report while still at the flight school, and so I didn't actually walk out the door till about 10 minutes later. And as I walked out, I see them all huddled up in a room, and I laughed, and I said, I'm not even out the door, and they're already on you. And they all looked at me, and their faces were turning red. I said, look, I know you guys do that, and I would expect that. So I don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, that's funny. So, again, we'll go back to the flight plan mindset for what we're trying to teach here. I think we need to know what the destination is, and if it's become a professional pilot or simply learn how to fly, or the family pilot, then we know where we're going. We got to know where we're going to start. And if you've not done anything to this point, you found this podcast, the right place to start is an introductory flight, or what some schools call a discovery flight. I think it's a short, condensed flight that'll give you a taste of what each lesson will look like. It's a real flight lesson, so you get to log the time, and you should get a good feel for the camaraderie around that school, like Wally said. But that doesn't have to be taken at the school that you ultimately join. When I started flying 8 years ago, I literally bought a Groupon coupon, took it at another flight school in the area. I thought that was crazy to buy a Groupon to go fly a plane with somebody. But I took it, I kind of got an idea, and actually it was a good learning experience for me, because it ended up being that I didn't want that type of an environment to learn from. And then I ultimately had the chance to go to other places and learn more about their businesses, and ultimately landing where I am now. But you're going to have that discovery flight, and then you get to build a plan. As Wally said, I think we're both really strong believers that you need to find that flight school. We'll call it a partner or partners. You might fly at a flight school and still have a family friend that does a few checkpoints for you along the way. But I think a school is really the best place to be. Again, some of this I might be a little biased, but a school is going to be the best place to be, because you're going to have multiple aircraft, multiple people, have a bigger family of people that are going to be able to help you. And ultimately, which school you pick or what you pick might be dependent on some other outside forces. So let's talk about those. And again, Eric, we're going to get to your point in a minute, but I think there's some prelude that we needed to get to here. The need for financial aid. Not every school offers or takes financial aid. I got many horror stories on financial aid. If you get a quote for financial aid and you're going to owe twice as much as you borrowed, I don't think that you need to be a pilot. There's many other careers out there. Be careful. I've seen a lot of people that have big bills for 20 years plus that will take all of their income as a pilot. It's very sad to see it. So if you need some help, maybe there's some solutions out there. The AOPA has some options. Flight Training Finance is a company that has some options. And then if you go to a college-affiliated school, those colleges probably have options. But tread carefully. Don't give away all the money you could ever make as a pilot just to become a pilot. That's not going to be good. If you have VA benefits, you've been in the military. As we record this, yesterday was Veterans Day. Thank you for your service, and I'm glad that the GI Bill's a real thing and you have those benefits. But not all schools can accept those benefits, so that might dictate a little bit more where you go. International students, same thing. Not all schools can train them. And then location is going to be the biggest one. If you have to drive more than 30 minutes to a flight school, you're going to need to think about that. I'd say hour tops, maybe 30 minutes might be realistic for all of us in big cities nowadays. But man, if you have to drive an hour to go to flight training, that's going to be a tough hour and back every day. So pick a good location that's going to work best for you as well. So we know our departure point. It's an introductory flight or discovery flight. And then we know our destination. We want to be a private pilot. What should that school look like? Now I've been forced my hand because I'm a VA student or whatever else. What else should I understand about that flight school? Do they have a good fleet? Are they capable of training Part 141? My thoughts would be if they don't have a half dozen planes it's going to be a interesting ride, because maintenance is going to be a problem, because they have planned maintenance, and if their fleet goes down, what else are you going to get into? I think a Part 141 school is key, but not necessarily training Part 141. If my son or daughter were going to go to training, I'd make them go to a 141 school. I might not make them train 141, but I know the FAA is involved, looking, watching. That would make me feel more confident. I'd make sure the crew was a bigger crew, not two people, not an independent. That way I would have some diversity from just their backgrounds. And at UFS, we try very intentionally to make sure we don't just hire our own people, and that we don't just hire people that come from other big schools like ATP. We try to get a diverse group, really a quarter and a quarter and a quarter. So a quarter are our people, a quarter come from ATP, a quarter come from the Spartans of the world, and then a quarter of our people come from other fly schools. That gives us the ability to hear the good from other schools and learn from that and incorporate that into our belief system and the way we train people. They got to have a good syllabus, and they got to have a good leadership team from like chiefs and people like Wally that are around the school, and have that relationship that goes beyond just a one-person decision maker kind of thing, for sure. Not all required, but it's what I would suggest if I was going to pick that school. And if you go out and you talk to schools, interview them, find at least 3 different schools, 2 independents in a school, 2 schools and an independent, whatever that is, and go interview them. You can find flight school interview questionnaires all over the place on the internet. Put something together that meets your Q&A needs and go interview them. I've been interviewed from 10 minutes to 3 hours, and the 3-hour guy ended up choosing us. So I know he did his due diligence other places, but I was sweating it out, man. The questions were actually tough. But we answered all of their questions, and they ultimately decided to fly here. And then share your goals with those partners. So if you have a plan of attack, I want to be a private pilot, I want to do it in 6 months, talk to them about it. Make sure they know you're adamant about using a syllabus. Ask them how they incorporate the ACS. The ACS is the Airman's Certification Standards. We've done many shows on it, but it is the guide. It's the open book test, for no better sense of it, for each of your certificates. And make sure you set those goals with those schools that you want to work with, and that they help you understand if they're realistic or not. Of course, I've had people walk in and say, I need to get my private in 2 weeks. Wally, is that possible?
Very unlikely. Very unlikely.
In the city of Houston, the weather's going to change enough in 2 weeks that it's probably not going to be likely.
Right. Yeah. Realistically, for someone who's going to fly three times a week, I don't know, 6 months, I think, is a realistic goal.
Agreed. And that's exactly what it took me. And I was a full-time dad at the time too. So things are going to come up. Things are going to happen. So Eric, here's kind of your checklist. So we've kind of got the minutia out of the way. You found your partner. You know what you're going to tackle. I think number 1 on your list of checklist items is listen to this podcast. Of course, I'm biased, but I think there's so much good information that we've put out that the podcast is a great place to start. Go interview those 3 schools and CFIs and pick the one that you want to work with. Ask them about how they do onboarding for new students. Understand how they'll indoctrinate you into their school, and what it's going to be like on a day in, day out basis. And then ask them to help you schedule your first flight lesson and your first ground lesson or session. And it's key that you do both of those things. So a flight lesson is the first lesson after discovery flight. You are in control. You should be learning how to fly straight and level, climbing turns, descending turns, understanding what wind's doing up there. It should be a fun flight and get you really involved with what you're experiencing inside that cockpit. And then that first ground session really should be more onboarding and more institutional information for you and your flight instructor. When should you buy a headset? When should you expect to show up to the school for a lesson? What's the pre-brief and post-brief like at that school? How are you charged? Are you charged for the whole time or not the whole time? Are they going to charge you for their whole time or not their whole time, depending on what you're working on? It's just a real good indoctrination of what you can expect and how you can expect to be handled and managed through the process, and what you should expect from them. Next, I think you got to decide on a few things after that first ground lesson. What kind of stuff are you going to acquire, buy, and what kind of stuff can you or will you borrow? What pace are you going to train at? What pace can they allow you to train at? What's your study plan? And then how do you get some of the major items handled early on in your training? So everybody has a differing opinion. All these learn how to fly guides have a salesman kind of piece to it, right? So they want to sell you all their stuff. But only thing I tell students to buy is a logbook, and bring a pad and paper and a backpack, probably one in a closet somewhere in your home. Don't go buy a flight bag, and let's get started. Like, don't buy anything else. The one thing you're going to want to buy sooner than later is a headset. And I would say probably by your third lesson, you would buy a headset. We have rentals. I'm sure most flight schools have rentals or loaners. But that's not something you're going to want to borrow forever. You're going to want a headset. And much like I wouldn't probably borrow Wally's microphone, I probably wouldn't borrow Wally's headset, but maybe once or twice if it was an emergency. Everything else, borrow it. You're going to hear about E6Bs, plotters, knee boards, fuel testers, foggles, flashlights, flight bags, headset bags, pens that write upside down, and pencils do that too, by the way. You're going to hear about everything. Like, don't buy any of it. If you are tempted to get an electronic flight bag, I would strongly encourage you to wait till after you've soloed. It's one distraction that you don't need in the cockpit for sure. Wait on that electronic flight bag until you have some flying skills under your belt. Now, this is the list of things that you're going to need that you should use or get, but there's 80 options for each one of these, and we'll talk a little bit about our preferences. So, an online video training course, not required. I would bet that 80% of students buy them nowadays. They vary from $99 to $500, but depending on all the value that they bring. If you like to learn with video training, I can't say there's a much more valuable thing in aviation than getting 50, 60 hours of video training for $200 or $300. If I had my preference, I would educate everyone on why the King schools have done such a great thing for aviation and why I would pick their solution. Lifetime updates, short tidbits of information, practical exam questions, practice tests, everything's included. But there's a million options out there. The beauty for the King schools for my flight school is that we use their syllabus as well. And there's a perfect overlap of their videos and our syllabus and how to use both at the same time. And all the instructors are versed on it. So it's a great solution, not required, but a great solution if you're looking for something and you don't have a choice to pick from. FAA books, you're going to need books. And the FAA gives all their books away for free. Go online and search FAA aviation manuals, and you will find more than you could possibly ever read. They're free for online use, PDF versions, and you can buy cheap reprints from just about anybody. Make sure you buy the one you want. They're not always in color, so make sure if you're going to buy the real books, make sure you're buying color ones. The Airman Certification Standards we just talked about is a free book from the FAA. Wally, how important is the ACS for private pilot students?
It's imperative. I mean, you got to have it. It's what the check ride. We as examiners are required to have a document called a plan of action, and it's basically what we want to do on a check ride. And that plan of action is created from the elements within the ACS. So the ACS is the test.
As a 40-year pilot, you've been flying for 40 years. You are a professional pilot. You fly big jets. You fly GA. How often do you use the ACS?
Oh, every check ride, every day that I'm doing general aviation stuff.
Almost every day.
I'm referring to it because I'm doing during I may do a private and a commercial. I'm thinking, okay, what is the standard on the steep turn on a commercial? Is it plus or minus 5 knots or 10 knots? So I'm referring to it. I mean, it's probably not something that you're going to read, but it's something you're going to reference. Okay, it's a reference book.
And if Wally's using it on every check ride, I would think every private student should use it on almost every flight, because you're working on a particular task that's going to have standards that you have to meet to pass a check ride. Don't leave it to just your CFI to say, look, we're going to do steep turns today, and you have 100 feet you can go down and 100 feet you can go up. And if you stay within that, you're going to be check ride compliant. Well, those statements are all true. But if you were to reference the ACS would have a lot of other information on it, that you must clear the area, that you must set up on a heading, that you must start a turn, that you must maintain an altitude and an airspeed, and that you must turn out on a given heading, etc. That's your reference guide. Go get an ACS. They're free online from the FAA, or you can buy a reprint, or you can print it yourself. But do get an ACS and make it part of your training from day one. A maneuvers guide, if you don't have one, they sell a bunch of them out there. We have a free one that we've written on our website, unitedflightsystems.com/docs. Feel free to go download that. DOCS is that website, so go download that if you want it. You're going to need a pre-solo knowledge exam at some point. There's a billion of those out there. We have one on our website. If you don't know where to get one, feel free to go to that same website, unitedflight.com/docs. And then we also have a workbook that we created that may help you with some of that pre-solo knowledge that's required to be seen by your CFI before you solo. Again, it's a checklist that Eric asked us for, that there's a million options out there. There's not just one. But I think we're pointing you towards some of the best options that are out there if you need something.
Let me just say something about the online ground schools. When you start talking to pilots, you're gonna get opinions, and you know what they say about opinions. They're like whats. Everybody has one. All the online ground schools, they're all successful. It's like cars. I mean, there's Ford, there's Chevy, there's Toyota, there's whatever. My whole life I've been a Ford guy. Okay, I happen to drive a Jeep now because when I needed a new car, the Ford Bronco hadn't come out yet. I was waiting for the Ford Bronco, but I was in a position where I needed a car, so I have a Jeep. But I've been a Ford guy all my life. I've never owned a Chevrolet. Does that mean there's anything wrong with Chevrolets? Absolutely not. There's lots of Chevrolets out there that are driving around. Now we got Teslas. Once you find one that works for you, if someone else says, "Oh no, you need to be using this one," that's just wrong. I mean, you use what works for you.
That's a good one. I think that is important for each of us to understand that. I don't like to read PDFs, so I've always bought the printouts, but I know a lot of people that like the PDFs. It's the same dang information. I'm not saying I'm right or they're wrong. I just don't like to read the PDF. So, that's another personal preference thing. So keep going down. We've now done our first flight. We've done our first ground session to really learn the perspective of things. We've made some decisions on these books and how I'm going to learn the book stuff and how I'm going to ingest all that information. Now we need to come up with our training pace and our study plan. And both of these are things that most of us don't like to do, create a plan. But it's very important for your training. And if you have goals at all with your training, you need to understand these. And we've mentioned this again on the podcast a lot. We're big believers that you need to plan to train 3 times a week. That'll probably produce 2 solid training events a week. Weather, life, something's going to cause maintenance, something's going to cause one of those to get canceled or pushed. If you can only afford or think you can only allot 2 times a week, okay. Maybe if you only think you can do once a week, okay. 2 times a month, okay. There's reasons why all of those could work. I would be a believer that if you can only do once a month, flying's probably not going to be in your long-term future. it's just too much information that erodes if you don't keep doing it. And once a month is going to be something that's going to take years for you to make progress as a student pilot, for sure.
Yeah, just think of an athlete. I mean, if you want to go out and play golf, learn to play golf from scratch. I mean, you've never picked up a club in your life. Probably the way to do it would not be to go play golf once a month.
That would make that very difficult, for sure.
Yeah.
And then a study plan, something that I think is overlooked a lot by brand new pilots, is really, what is my study plan? We all want to get in an airplane and fly. I get it. But you got to have a plan to get the book work done and get the knowledge done. And it's got to be at a pace that you can both handle and consume that information. So preparing for this, I kind of created a cheat sheet. So by rating, how many hours of homework do I need to do for each hour of flight time that I get? And is there a correlation with how much ground I should seek from an instructor as well? And I really think there is. You might want to try to avoid that ground with an instructor to quote unquote save money, but I can assure you, you're never going to get away from it. You're going to think you're saving it by not doing it, but you're going to ultimately end up doing it in a running cockpit of an aircraft that's going to be much, much more expensive than doing it in their classroom. So for a private pilot, I think for each hour of flight time that you log, you're going to need at least 2 hours of homework time and approximately a half hour of one-on-one with your instructor. That one-on-one with your instructor is probably not going to be the elements of the written knowledge exam that you're going to take. They're going to be weather theory, go, no-go decisions, personal minimums, systems in an aircraft. It's going to be other stuff that you don't really learn from a knowledge test prep kind of course. It's going to be the intricate details of learning how to fly. Instrument, for each hour flight, I think it's 3 hours of homework, 1 hour of one-on-one with an instructor. Commercial, 1 hour flight time, 2 hours of homework, half hour ground. Multi-engine, 3 hours of homework for each flight hour and probably 1 hour of ground for each hour of flight time. And if you want to work on your CFI one day, I think you're going to need 1 hour of flight time for every 10 hours of homework and probably 3 hours with your instructor. And that's because it's a lot of teaching and a lot of lesson plan creation and a lot of homework to be able to. The flying is not the biggest part of a CFI rating, for sure.
Yeah, I always go back to the sports analogies, but if you think about an NFL football team, they spend some time out on the practice field, but those guys are in meetings a lot. They're watching film. They're spending a lot of time in meeting rooms. They're also spending time in the weight room. So it's not just practice field game. So, that's kind of an analogy that maybe we can all relate to. The cockpit of an airplane is a horrible classroom. Okay, it's noisy. There are outside things going on. There's ATC as your instructor is trying to tell you things. ATC is maybe not calling you, but they're talking to other people. So you got chatter going on in the background, and you may not be in a position where you can shut that off. So, the best classroom is a classroom, and so you can learn so much more. When I talk about multi-engine students, multi-engine airplanes usually are renting for about $300 an hour. That's $5 a minute. $5 a minute when that Hobbs is going. I mean, you got a $5 bill that you're throwing out the window every minute. That's expensive. So take advantage of a classroom and your own preparation. You do need to come in and spend some time. I'm a drummer. I took lots of drum lessons in my life. And if you just came in every week for your 30-minute lesson with a teacher without practicing, you're just really wasting your time and his time, and certainly wasting your money.
No question. All good analogies, and they all really do make sense as it relates to what we're trying to accomplish here. We talked about that first flight lesson, that first ground session or lesson. I think it's important that you spend some time with that instructor and that flight school to understand a few key elements that need to happen early on. That's the student pilot certificate. I would think they would issue that either at that first flight lesson or that first ground lesson. It's kind of your first badge of honor. You are a pilot. You need a student pilot certificate. You'll have to have that before you solo. It's free of charge. There's no reason why a school or an independent instructor doesn't get you that student pilot certificate in one of your first couple lessons. The medical, that's something that you're going to need as well by the time you solo. And it's not an invasive medical exam. If you want to be a professional pilot, you should probably get a first-class medical. Make sure you can pass a first-class medical. And it's an obvious thing that you would get that somewhat early. I would say by your third lesson as well. You'd hate to spend money on 10 lessons, go to the doctor and realize you had a color blindness issue that you weren't really aware of that's going to prevent you from flying aircraft.
Yeah, and there are 3 classes of medical. So there's a first class, second class, third class. So for just a private pilot, all it's required is a third class. If you want to be an airline pilot, you'll need a first class, and just a commercial pilot would require a second class. Each one have different levels of what word am I trying to use?
Invasion.
Yeah. They're all, none of them are particularly bad, but maybe the blood pressure parameters on a first class are a little bit stricter than they are in a third class.
Yeah.
I know, for instance, the vision. I think on a third class, I think 2030 passes a third class medical. I think. I'm no doctor, so don't hold me to it. But first class, that's not going to cut it. So it'd be a good idea if you went in and you, I didn't realize I had a blood pressure problem, or the thing that you brought up, Bobby, the colorblind thing. Gee, I didn't know this was an issue. It'd be nice to find out now.
And if you're not sure, if your medication or your past history would be a problem, there's resources for that as well. The next item I was going to talk about is kind of joining organizations, and this is a good time to segue to that. If you join the AOPA as a student, it's free as a student pilot for 6 months. We said it'd take about 6 months maybe to get that private out of the way. So you'd be a member of the AOPA. They have medical hotlines that you can contact, ask questions of, check medication to see if it's on the approved list or not. And it would be a great organization to join. You should definitely call them if you have any questions or concerns before you go see an AME to make sure that everything's going to be good to go when you go see that doctor. Other things you might want to consider joining are local social media groups. You might want to learn about local study groups and local clubs that there may be in the area where you can learn and join other like-minded aviators and become a better pilot. All right, so the next item on our list for Eric's checklist that he asked for is the syllabus, following that syllabus. If your school doesn't hand you a syllabus and they're not walking you through that syllabus as you learn, that's a big red flag for me. If you want to be a professional pilot, which means you're probably going to be a flight instructor, I challenge people all the time to start thinking like a flight instructor early. Have that syllabus, make notes, keep a journal, keep every training aid that you come across that you really like. You could be a much better flight instructor if you did that when you didn't have all the knowledge that you're going to have one day, and could go back and look at those notes and go, oh, my student's struggling with this because I struggled with this because of X, Y, and Z. And it'll make you a much better teacher for sure. And in our world, our syllabus follows that online training course as well. So it's a double whammy in a good way for sure, that's going to help people. All those syllabi, no matter who makes them, probably follow the same 3 buckets of training: pre-solo, cross-country flying, and check ride prep. And so at a high level, you need to be thinking about those 3 components and kind of finishing the solo work before you finish the cross-country, before you finish the check ride prep stuff. And there's 2 schools of thoughts. Do I study that material, Wally, to FAA minimums, or do I study them to maximum for proficiency? And I would say the chasm is wide between those 2 variants.
It's very wide. So, I keep going back to a sports analogy. I think every NFL team Their goal at the beginning of the year is to win every game. Is it realistic to think that they're going to go 17-0? A baseball team is a baseball team going to go 162-0? No, it's never happened. But having said that, every time they go out, their goal is to win the game. So in essence, that is the goal of the season, is to go undefeated, right? So yeah, I mean, when you want to do these maneuvers, you're shooting for perfection. Everything I do in my life, I am trying to do perfectly, and I fall short of being perfect, and sometimes not being perfect is okay. I mean, we're all living proof of that. So, when you're flying this steep turn, and you're at 3,000 feet, and you're going from 2,900 to 3,100, it's probably not the time to walk away and say, "Oh yeah, that met the standards." Well, maybe it met the standards, but it's probably not what we want to be shooting for. Shoot for the moon.
No doubt. And if we've done the syllabus, or we're following the syllabus, I think that's the key. That the key secret sauce that maybe Eric was missing was all these tips that we've given to this point on the checklist items that you need to follow, and then really work through the training material with a syllabus. Know when you're ahead, know when you're behind, make up those gaps, and follow that plan of attack through your training. This next section, or the next list of items, is really training tips that Wally and I would give you to maximize the checklist up to this point. I think it's important that you use 2 CFIs. I think you should have a primary and a secondary for sure. If nothing else, someone's teaching you something wrong, they have a bad technique, the other CFI is going to catch that early and often. So I would fly 4 or 5 times with one CFI and then have another look with someone else. Do stage checks, each of those 3 buckets, pre-solo, cross-country, and probably check ride prep. At least do a stage check with each of those phases or stages with a chief pilot, someone with a lot of experience. You would be remiss if you didn't do a mock oral and some sort of a mock flight for a check ride. There's just too many things that can go wrong on the day of that you want to be lockstep, ready to go, and have been tested by someone before you meet your Wally in your hometown. And don't take your knowledge exam more than 2 weeks before your check ride, because you're just doing it when you don't have all the information that you need yet. So please trust us. The knowledge exam does not do anything for you if you take it early. You don't save any money by taking it early. Take it just a couple weeks before your check ride, and then try to book your check ride after you've been signed off in IACRA with your instructor. There is a clock that might start ticking, but you have plenty of time to get that check ride on the schedule and get it ready to go. And once that's scheduled, then 3 days before your check ride, I think you need to do the following things to make that day less stressful and more enjoyable. Make sure you've logged into IACRA. Wally, we've said it. How many passwords need to be reset when they're sitting in front of you?
Yeah. It happens quite I don't know, 10-15% of the time. The applicant goes to log in and the password isn't working. And you try the wrong password enough, and then you get locked out. So now you're calling up the help desk, and I see the stress level. I see the blood pressure, the pulse going up of the applicant, and I'm over there saying, okay, it's all right.
Yep.
Back off from the ledge. It's going to be okay. But I do see the stress.
Just
level.
Eliminate that for yourself, and make sure you log into IACRA. Make sure you review the maintenance records. The DP is going to make you go through the maintenance records with them. Make sure you've reviewed those with your flight school, with your CFI, that you know what needs to be logged and what needs to be in those logbooks, and make sure you're ready to go with that. Make sure you use the checklist for a check ride inside the ACS. The FAA has provided you a really good checklist to get ready. And if you want to be a superstar, if you want to be a star student, we did an episode on being a star student. Make sure you put all that information together for your check ride in a nice notebook that is ready to go for your DPE on the day of your check ride. Make sure that's done and complete a couple days before your check ride. And then the day of the check ride, or maybe the night of the check ride, don't try to cram. You either know the material or you don't at this point. Cramming that night before is not going to help your brain process what it needs to process on the day of the check ride. At the day of the check ride, get to the place where you're going to meet your DPE early. Be there 15, 20 minutes early. Get things set up. Make sure the room's unlocked. Make sure the room's presentable. Get you a bottle of water. Settle in for the day and just kind of decompress a little bit. You don't want to be rushing. You don't want traffic to slow you down and all those external pressures start building up. And do not, I did it. I see people do it all the time. Do not try to impress your DPE. No matter what you've done in your 60 hours of flying that you've done to this point, you are not going to impress your DPE. They're not going to be amazed by how smooth your soft field landing is, how well you know the far aim. They've probably done 10x the number of check rides that you have flight hours. So just don't try to impress them. And please don't volunteer any information that they're not asking you about. I have horror stories of my own self. On my private check ride, I said, hey, this piece of equipment has been safety wired. And he's like, why are you telling me this information? I don't need to know that, right? And it's not required. It's not something, but what do you think he has to do then? And this wasn't Wally, by the way. This was someone else, but they've got to investigate it. They got to see if it's within the regs and it's legal and blah, blah, blah. Don't volunteer anything on the day of the check ride. Answer the questions that you're asked as clearly and shortly as possible. I also added a bunch of information, which I know is a detriment to my check ride that day.
Yeah. ATQ, answer the question. And because people start going down rabbit holes, and it's like, well, okay, you brought it up. So since you brought it up, what about this? Well, I don't know. Let me just say something about the knowledge test. It's one of the bumps that we have to address in our flight training. You have to take a knowledge test. And I'm just going to share a little bit of my history. I failed my private pilot. Back in my day, we called it a written test because it was really you wrote with a pencil. It wasn't a computer-based thing. I failed my private the first time I think I made a 68. And then I passed it the second time with a 71. I got one more question right. I failed my instrument the first time. I made a 60 the first time. I failed my instrument the second time. I made a 69. I passed my instrument the third time with a 71. So I got one more correct. So by the time I had my instrument rating, I had taken 5 knowledge tests. I had failed 3 of them. I had a 40% pass rate, which, would people might say, well, were you discouraged? Did you think you wanted to quit? No, absolutely not. But then I kind of learned, I got in the groove of how to study for these tests, and I learned some things. And back in the day, it wasn't instantaneous. You'd hand in this piece of paper to the proctor, and he would mail it into the FAA, and you got your written test results back in about 3 to 4 weeks. So you handed it in, and you didn't know. You didn't know. It's like, well, do I go on to the next phase, or do I keep studying? And then you go to the mailbox, and there's a letter from the FAA, and you open it, half scared to open it, and it's like, I passed 71, yay. So don't get discouraged with that, really. Please don't get discouraged. I know I'm just going to say this. There's stuff on the knowledge tests question bank that I just think is ridiculous. It's like by the fact that you know the answer to this, it does not make you a safer or a better pilot. And that's the bottom line. Bottom line is we're trying not to crash airplanes. We want to be safe pilots. And so some of those questions are head scratchers for me, like, okay, why are we asking this? Why do we care?
No doubt. We had a student this past week take a written knowledge exam, and the computers were down at the end of his exam. He had to wait 3 hours. He said that was the most painstaking 3 hours of his life to figure out if he passed this commercial knowledge test or not. I can only imagine what 3 weeks would be like for some of us today.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was just the way it was.
So let's wrap these things up. We're really getting down to the nitty-gritty on the last part of this checklist. So you've hopefully done everything we've said to this point. You're in your check ride. You're taking your check ride. You're successful in your check ride. Then celebrate. Go take a picture with that tail number. We all have it. Most of us have it. If you don't have it, go take a picture with the tail number. Ask the DP if you want a picture with them. I'm sure they'll accommodate. And I get a lot of questions as soon as those check rides are over. And they're like whispers. They're like, again, part of this secret society. Do I ask my DPE to sign my logbook? Wally, do you ever sign logbooks for check rides?
Absolutely. It's not a requirement. I don't have to. Some people like me to, and I don't mind signing it. I'll put my signature in there.
Was I pilot in command on that check ride, or was I not pilot in command? I'm not really sure. I should know how to log it. I don't know how to log it. Wally, how should I log it?
Yeah, you are pilot in command. So it's you are pilot in command. So even on a private pilot check ride, you are technically not a private pilot, but you are PIC, and you're making the decisions, so it is logged as PIC.
So if it's 1.8 hours on this check ride, do I put 1.8 hours dual if you are going to sign it for me too?
No, you're not getting dual. I'm just an observer.
Yep. So again, these are like questions that we should make simpler for everybody, but make sure if you want your DP to sign the logbook, ask them. I'm sure they'll sign it. Not required. You are pilot in command. Do I get to keep my student pilot certificate? Well, I kind of like this souvenir, my first card with Orville and Wilbur on it. I don't. Can I keep it?
Yeah, we are supposed to cut a corner of it or punch a hole in it, so it's not used. And probably a good idea. You don't want to inadvertently put the wrong card in your in your wallet, a little bit like a credit card, and you get a new card.
Get ramp checked with a student pilot when you're a commercial pilot.
Right. So,
and then, I got my temporary. You've made me sign it. I'm a private pilot now. My flight school has a laminator. Should I laminate that temporary certificate?
No.
And the answer to that is no. Don't do that.
No, you're hopefully going to only have that temporary certificate for about 5 to 6 weeks. If somehow you were to lose it or jump in a swimming pool with your wallet in it, there are ways to get a new one. It's not that big a deal.
So the next item on the checklist is not go fly for fun. And this is one item on the checklist that too many people don't do it, Wally. They probably already have their first instrument lesson on the calendar before they pass the check ride. But it's important to go fly for fun. Absolutely
it is. I think that's why most of us get into flying, is because we think it's fun. And we did an episode called Mission Oriented Time Building. Just go out and go somewhere. Pick a place to go, and whether it's to go for lunch or an overnight or whatever, have fun with it. We get in this mode of flight training. Again, going back to the sports analogy, they don't just practice all the time. There's a game every once in a while, and that's what we're shooting for. So go have fun with it.
Yeah, maybe this is called a scrimmage, but they definitely are doing something to enjoy the game as well. All right, as we wrap up, some other things to consider. Man, I wish I knew these things when I was at the stage Eric's at today. So we're going to throw out some other tips and tricks at the end of this that don't really constitute checklist items. But I think I would have a running logbook audit form of some sort, Wally, if I was a private student today, and make sure that each of my lessons were knocking down something for me. If you're lucky, your school maybe uses an electronic syllabus, i.e. like ours does. And if that's the case, then they're maybe doing that for you so that you know what minimums you're knocking down and accomplishing. But there's probably always going to be some gap in that electronic system. Have you done your long cross countries? Have you been adding enough solo time to meet the needs of your syllabus? etc. Make sure you're keeping track of that as you go. I highly recommend that everybody buy Flight Simulator or X-Plane and a joystick so that they can have a simulator at home. It probably provides some value as a private pilot, but it provides a ton of value as an instrument commercial pilot. It's going to cost you a couple $100, but less than one dual session with your instructor, and it'll provide you a lifetime of fun and learning as it relates to aviation. And then if you do want to buy an electronic flight bag, make sure you buy an iPad with a cellular chip. It'll give you a GPS chip in it and make it much more enjoyable until you decide. And my last tip will be my second to last tip will be to consider an ADS-B solution. That's a Stratus, a Century, one of those whiz-bang devices that'll show you other traffic in the air with you, which might become very, very important one day for you. And then my last tip is to set personal minimums. Live by those personal minimums and make sure that it's black and white. A personal minimum recently was I challenged somebody about icing. It's starting to get cool. We're a long way from icing, but I asked them, what's your rule on icing? And they go, if it's cool outside, I would check it. And I said, well, no, it's freezing. Like, what's your rule? How far does visible moisture have to be away from you? Oh, at least a few thousand feet. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, what's a few thousand feet? Is that 5 or 3? I think it's 3. Okay. Well, if it's freezing on the ground, it's 3,000 feet overcast. You're going to have a real problem flying in that because you could get into icing almost anywhere on a day like that. It might not see all the moisture in the air, and you surely might need to climb for some reason. So I would be very cautious if the icing level was even 10,000 feet, because I know I could ultimately get into it in a little Cessna. So make sure it's a black and white line. Don't make it vague, and learn those personal minimums early. Stick to them early, and you will be a much better pilot for it. Long episode, Wally, almost an hour in. We've covered everything that we wanted to cover. Eric, hopefully this provides you and future pilots a checklist that they can follow for how to go from a zero-time pilot to actually passing that check ride successfully and not getting pulled in a million different directions. The information is very broad out there. Hopefully you guys and gals all learned something today and will make your path to private easier. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, share it with your friends. As always, fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.